Welcome aboard the Decade Bird. Stay tuned for an unabridged audio presentation from the Star Wars Expanded Universe.
A long time ago. In a galaxy far, far away. Star Wars. Tales from the New Republic. Edited by Peter Schweighofer and Craig Carey. Read by Decade Bird Publishing.
The Last Hand by Paul Danner. Sabak. Dunn's resounding laughter echoed through the gambling hall, the Herglick's huge body shaking with the effort. You lose again, boy. V6, Dunn's droid, quickly calculated his master's winnings and enthusiastically reported the total for all to hear. The gathered crowd cheered as the Herglick claimed the pot, leaving Neo with a single credit to his name. The young man lowered his head in disbelief, fighting back tears. How could I have been so stupid? Neo thought as he stared at the lone credit chip that constituted all the money he had in the galaxy. Now, all hope was gone. Dunn, the great gambler, able to steal the money from a poor farm boy with ease. I suppose you were equally skilled at firing your heavy blaster on unarmed opponents. The bold words silenced the room. The Herglick looked up in shock, searching the sycophantic circle of admirers who always clung to winners for the dissonant voice. The spectators parted for the cloaked figure as if he were a thermal detonator. A large hood kept the stranger's face in the shadow, but the dark visage was obviously focused on the Herglick. You think you could do better, friend? Dunn asked, a dangerous edge in his deep voice. The figure gestured to the crowd. I wouldn't want to embarrass you in front of your friends. I never turn away anyone so obviously willing to lose his money to me, Dunn chuckled. Sit down. The stranger paused for a moment, then slid into the empty seat. Very well. But I must warn you, though. The Herglick cocked an eyebrow. Wait, don't tell me. Let me guess. Dunn gestured dramatically. You're the greatest gambler who ever lived, right? Actually, I was just going to say that I don't have any money on me. But now that you mention it, the stranger lowered his hood, eliciting a collective gasp from the spectators. I am. The stranger's close-cropped hair was white, though streaks of silver snaked their way through the ivory. His eyes were pale violet, like tropical flowers that had withered and lost their luster. A jagged scar wound its way around his lip, cutting an unnatural line up past his nose. With stony features reminiscent of a royal statue, the man was undeniably handsome. However, that wasn't the reason for the crowd's reaction. The whispers had begun, and the buzzing made it seem as if the colony of insects had descended upon the room. Throughout the snatches of conversation in the multitude of language, two words were repeated with frightening frequency. Kinnin Vaucher. Dunn's thick flesh had begun to mottle, a sure sign the Herglick was agitated. This is nothing but a trick, master. V6 leaned forward, eyes flashing as his databanks began recalling information. The Ashanda ray was reported lost in the Tias cluster half a century ago. If Kinnin Vaucher had survived, which is highly unlikely, he would be well over 100 standard years old. The man was lucky, but he was no Jedi. It would seem you are not who you appear to be after all. Dunn seemed to calm a bit, his usual predatory smirk returning to his face. I must admit, though, the resemblance is uncanny. You must have paid a fortune on cosmetic alterations. No wonder you're broke. A nervous chuckle escaped the crowd. For such a renowned gambler, Dunn, You're a much faster dealer of opinions than cards. The stranger leveled his piercing gaze. Perhaps you win by talking until your opponents die of sheer boredom. One thing I never deal in is charity, the Herglick said, a note of irritation creeping into his voice. Until you ante up, there will be no game. That drew a mixed reaction from the crowd. Many wanted to see if the stranger really was telling the truth, and there was only one way to decide that. But Dunn, what if he really is Vaucher? One brave soul asked. The Herglick had had enough, and his blubber shook with fury. I don't care if he's Jabba the Hutt. Without money, he doesn't play. A single credit spun through the air, shimmering in the dim glow lights. Without blinking, Vaucher plucked the cred from its flight with practiced ease. He slowly turned to face his surprised benefactor. Neo started to say something, but Vaucher offered a wink that was so quick, the young man was scarcely sure he saw it at all. From one loser to another. How appropriate. Are you ready then? Dunn demanded. Vaucher's face lost all expression, resembling a droid that had been abruptly powered down. Those strange eyes took a faraway look, as if they were staring into eternity. He spoke only a single word, but it sent a chill down the spine of every being present who had one. Deal, Vaucher said. The room grew deathly quiet, and the game began. Dunn slid a blubbery fin across his forehead, which was glistening with perspiration. The Herglick examined his cards and grunted softly. His pile of credits was steadily decreasing, while Vaucher's loan credit had gained thousands of friends in less than an hour. He glanced up at his opponent, but the human gambler's face may as well have been carved out of ferrostone. Only Vaucher's right hand was in motion, absently twirling the obsidian stone pendant hanging from his neck. When he had first removed the bauble from underneath his shirt, a collective gasp resounded from the crowd. The necklace that was rumored to be the source of the legendary gambler's astonishing luck. It was yet another piece of evidence that suggested that this man was really who he claimed to be. The Herglick watched his shifting sabbat cards and nearly grinned. The four of coins had reformed into the mistress of staves, with a value of 13. He already had the 9 of staves. Dunn dramatically pushed the metallic cards into the neutral stabilizer field. 22. Vaucher began laying out his cards. The ace of flasks, the master of flasks, and the 9 of flasks. A total of 38. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Neo winced and looked away. The gambler was about to go bust. Chuckling, the Herglick reached for the pot. 15,000 credits. Vaucher played one more card into the neutral field. The evil one. -15. That brought his hand down to 23. Sabak, he said, grabbing Dunn's hand just as it reached the thick stack of credits at the center of the table. I believe that's mine. The Herglick snarled. Your luck cannot last forever, imposter. But it did. In another hour, Vaucher held over 100,000 credits. The crowd not only began to believe, they had completely shifted allegiance. V6 was the lone supporter remaining in Dunn's corner, and the droid was not exactly encouraging. Please, master, V6 implored. You must end this before— Shut up, the Herglick roared, shoving the droid away. He slammed a cred stick onto the table. One more, human. Double or nothing. Don't risk it, Neo whispered, eyeing Vaucher's winnings. Let's just cut and run. The gambler smiled, his pale violet pupils dilated with excitement. I never back down from a challenge. He eyed his opponent. Ready? Dunn nodded, nostrils flaring. The gambler spun the obsidian pendant on its chain, and the stone danced as if it were alive. More than one observer found himself transfixed by the sight as Vaucher reached for his cards. Neo and Vaucher walked out of the gambling hall with nearly 250,000 credits. The young man was so excited, he couldn't stop talking. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I never would have believed it. Well, Dunn actually played the game, and I'm betting he still isn't sure what happened. The gambler patted the youth on the back and handed him the small electronic stick containing 200,000 credits. All yours, my boy. I kept the change for expenses. Hope you don't mind. Are you kidding? Neo's hand was shaking as he held the cred stick. I can't thank you enough for this. You've literally made my dreams come true. That's a lot of money you've got there. Vaucher studied the young man. You obviously don't frequent places like that. So I'm assuming you were trying to win for a reason. Neo glanced off into the distance, shuffling his feet uncomfortably. Sorry, I have a bad habit of sticking my nose in where it's not welcome. Curiosity is just one of many vices, but it gets me in trouble more than any of the others. The gambler squeezed Neo's shoulder. Whatever it is, I hope it works out for you. Vaucher pulled up the hood of his cloak and effortlessly slid into the crowd. Wait! The gambler turned as the youth caught up. If you hadn't been nosy back there, I'd be walking home with 1 credit in my pocket. Can we talk? Neo glanced around the bustling street. In private? Vaucher shook his head and laughed. Now you've gone and done it. I never could pass up a good confidential chat. The gambler gestured to a dingy cantina in the distance. After you. The duo sat at a booth in the rear of the cantina, with a bottle of Corellian whiskey and a good deal of space between themselves and the next patrons. Vaucher blended in so well with the shadows that it seemed as if Neo was sitting alone at the table. The gambler drowned another shot of the tangy drink and stared at his companion. Well, have you imbibed enough liquid courage yet? Or am I going to be sitting here all night? Neo chuckled, then grew serious. Are you really Kenan Vaucher? Last I heard. Then how is it that you're... The gambler held up a gloved hand. I thought we were here because you wanted to reveal your secrets. Point taken. The young man took a drink and then a deep breath. The reason I need the money is... Promise not to laugh. I never make promises, son. I only deal in cards, not words. Neo didn't respond. He was staring into his glass, as if mesmerized by the smooth contours. After a few more moments of silence, he finally spoke. His voice was a whisper. I want to buy a lightsaber. The gambler's eyes widened. Really? You think it's stupid? No. That's just the last thing I expected to hear. I figured it was something more mundane. A sick family member in need of an expensive operation. A beautiful girl you couldn't afford to marry. Maybe a debt to a nefarious crime lord. Neo shook his head. No, nothing like that. So where do you intend to pick one up? They're not exactly standard stock for equipment shops, you know. I've heard about a black market dealer who has one for sale. Where? Neo was obviously reluctant to answer. Come on, son, the gambler said, reaching for his glass. It's not as if I'm going to race there ahead of you and snatch it up. Nar Shaddaa. Vaucher nearly spat out his drink. The smuggler's moon? The gambler narrowed his eyes and gave the young man an appraising glance. Just how old are you, anyway? 20 standard years, he said proudly. And you've lived here on Mirado all your life. Have you ever been off-world before? Well, no, but I've seen plenty of hollows. Vaucher burst out laughing. What's so funny? Neo said, obviously annoyed. Nothing. What could possibly be funny about a boy who's never been off his home planet, traveling by himself to one of the most dangerous hives of scum and villainy in the galaxy, with 200,000 credits on him to purchase an illegal weapon from a shady black market dealer. He leaned forward. Are you even carrying a blaster? The young man's silence answered the question. The gambler wiped tears from his eyes. By the force, you must be either an overconfident fool or a half-wit. Your star may be fiery, but it isn't going to burn long in the galaxy if you keep up this sort of behavior. Neo stood abruptly, slamming his fist against the table. I don't need a lecture, especially not from somebody who's supposed to be dead because he was too lazy to pilot his ship around an extremely dangerous area of space. The young man started to leave, but wasn't through yet. And you may be the greatest gambler who ever lived, but you have a lot to learn about dealing with people. See you around. With that, Neo promptly stormed out of the cantina.
You never change, do you, Shay?
The disembodied voice was hauntingly beautiful, caressing the gambler's cheek like a cool breeze. Listen. Boucher took a final swig directly from the whiskey bottle and walked to the door. If you want to put your 2 credits in, just leave them on the table. I don't have change for a tip. So, how much for passage to Nar Shaddaa? The Barabel captain quickly calculated his figure, then grinned at Neo. With all those sharp teeth, it wasn't a comforting sight. 25,000, paid in advance. No refund under any circumstances. The young man stumbled over his words. I don't know. That seems like an awful lot. That's because it is. Both the Barabel and Neo looked up at the new voice. Boucher stood at their table, arms folded across his chest. The boy could get a better deal from a Jawa, and on something far nicer than the garbage scow you're passing off as a tramp freighter. Enraged, the captain stood, towering over the gambler. You insult me. No, you insult him, Boucher said, indicating Neo. And if you want to live to prey on another easy mark, I suggest you leave immediately, or else you'll be insulting me. Barabels, however, are not easily intimidated. And why should I care about that, little man? Boucher shifted his position slightly, flashing the 2 holdout blasters he held tucked under arms. The captain snorted and took a threatening step forward. I could make you eat those. If you were that good, you'd have already done it instead of just talking about it, the gambler said, refusing to give up a centimeter of ground. Now go, find some nerfs to herd. The Barabel shoved past Boucher and slipped into the crowd, milling around the bar. Still chuckling, the gambler slipped the blasters back into his cloak and dropped into the vacated seat. What do you want now? The young man asked. Just to talk. Neo started to get up. I don't have anything else to say to you. Boucher reached out and quickly yanked him back into his seat. Hey, let me go. Not until you've heard my offer. What kind of offer? I'll fly you to Nar Shaddaa. Neo couldn't believe it. Why would you do that? To make sure you get there without dying, the gambler said, rocking back in his chair. And so you can pay me 10,000 credits. It didn't take him long to consider the offer. Deal, Neo said, smiling. Let's get going then. The young man was already headed for the door, giddy with excitement. I can't believe this. Boucher shook his head as he followed Neo out. Join the club, he said softly. There she is. The gambler's voice was filled with pride only a parent or a ship captain could ever know. Neo stepped into docking bay 49, and his mouth promptly fell open. The Ashanda Ray! The 2 men circled the graceful curves of the light freighter. Boucher carefully slid a hand along her smooth underbelly. She was designed by a good friend of mine, a Mon-Cal engineer with a great eye. Like most ships designed by the Mon Calamari, the Ray was a model of efficiency, structural strength, and aesthetic appeal. More than a spacecraft, It resembled a handcrafted piece of art. With myriad pods, bulges, and bumps, the ship almost appeared organic rather than constructed, like a great ocean-dwelling creature. She can be a headache for maintenance and repair, but other than that, quite a beauty, Neo agreed. But I don't see any weapons, or sensors, or anything. What would an exotic woman be without her secrets? The gambler laid an arm around the young man's shoulders. Now come on, let's go get your lightsaber. Exhausted from his exploits, Neo spent most of the trip in one of the Rey's extremely comfortable bunks. Boucher was resting in the cockpit, half asleep himself. The ship would warn him if anything came up, and the smoothly accelerating star lines of light speed always made the gambler drowsy. When he heard the lilting voice, he wasn't sure if he was dreaming or not. You definitely have your moments. His eyes popped open, definitely not dreaming. Was there any doubt in your mind? Do you want me to be honest or nice? Nice, Boucher grinned. So what's the word? It's hard to say right now. I need more time. Don't we all? He's coming. Boucher craned his neck over the top of the chair. Well, well, look what the Gundark dragged in. Neo entered the cockpit, still rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. He unceremoniously plopped down into the co-pilot seat. Are we there yet? The gambler checked his displays. Almost. You get some rest. The young man nodded, surveying the cockpit. Good. Boucher leaned back in his chair, absently twirling his pendant. You'll need to keep your eyes wide open in a place like Nar Shaddaa. Bad things can happen to people faster than you can even think about pulling your blaster. That's okay, Neo answered with a grin. I don't have one, remember? The gambler chuckled. After a few moments, he grew serious and turned to face Neo. You never told me why you wanted a lightsaber. You never told me how you survived your untimely demise in the Tias cluster. The young man countered evenly. Or how come you're not 100 years old? An even exchange, huh? Okay, but I asked first. The gambler immediately recognized that distant look that crept into Neo's eyes. It was the one that always prefaced the resurfacing of a lifelong dream and usually culminated in trouble. I want to become a Jedi Knight, the young man said, in a voice just above a whisper. The gambler was silent for a moment. I thought they built their own lightsabers when they were actually ready to wield one. That seemed to deflate Neo slightly, but he quickly recovered. I just wanted to have something connected with them. I mean, it's not like there's anyone around to train me. I don't know. He stared out the viewport, at the stars rushing past. I guess I thought that if I felt a lightsaber in my hands, there'd be some kind of magic, you know? You have to take your first step somewhere, and this was the only path I could find. Well spoken, young one. Huh? Neo snapped out of his reverie and glanced back at Boucher. Did you say something? Wasn't me, the gambler said with a wink. So I held up my end of the bargain. Now let's hear your story. Something caught Boucher's eye. It'll have to wait. Why? The gambler's hands were already dancing over the controls, abruptly dropping the Rey out of hyperspace. Because we've got company. I've got a bad feeling about this. Boucher tracked the 3 incoming ships on the Rey's sensors. Who is it? They haven't introduced themselves yet, but somehow I don't think it's a welcoming committee. The gambler eyed the display and frowned. 1 Trock freighter and 2 Z-95 headhunters. Could be worse, I guess. How? We're already outnumbered. But never outclassed. The comlink sounded its shrill call, drawing Boucher's attention. It sounds as if they want to talk. That's always a good sign. This is Captain Yarku of the Night Raider, came the filtered voice. He sounds familiar, Neo said. Vaucher grunted. It's that Baravel from the cantina. Are you sure? I never forget a voice. What could he possibly want? Only one way to find out, the gambler said, then engaged the comlink. Is there a problem, Captain? There will be, unless you hand over all the credits you stole from Dunn. Stole? From Dunn? Ha! That blubberpot Herg must be going senile. I won that money fair and square in a sabat game. Dunn does not share your view of the situation. He believes you cheated him, and he has hired us to retrieve his money. If you hand it over, there will be no damage to you or your ship. Otherwise... The Baravel's voice trailed off ominously. Dunn is nothing but a poor loser. And as far as I'm concerned, he's going to stay that way. You know, I was hoping you'd say that, Yarku said, with an unfriendly chuckle. Then there was only static. The two Z-95s broke off into standard flanking formation as frighteningly powerful laser bolts erupted from the Trock freighter. Vaucher executed a quick barrel roll and then pointed the Ray's nose into a power dive. The two bolts screamed past, cutting through the space that the ship had occupied microseconds before. Neo couldn't believe it. That thing's got a pair of quad lasers. So much for talking, Vaucher grumbled as he swung the Ray around to face an oncoming headhunter. This ship does have weapons, right? Neo asked. The gambler merely grinned and touched one of the control screens. One of the pods on the Ray's belly spiraled open, revealing a large, triple-barreled laser cannon. The turret swung around, locking on to the approaching headhunter. A thunderous volley of laser bolts tracked the Z-95 as it tried to execute an evasive turn. The blast walked right up the ship's exposed starboard side, shredding the shields, and finally exploding the ship's wing. Without the starboard stabilizers, the headhunter began to spin out of control, harmlessly veering off into the distance. Does that answer your question? The gambler asked with a smug grin. His smile faded as one of the Night Raider's quad laser bolts slammed into the Ray's port side. The impact spun the light freighter around sharply, and Vaucher found himself fighting to keep her steady. The other headhunter was coming in, with all blasters blazing away mercilessly. Unable to evade the attack, the Ray was forced to take a considerable pounding from the Z-95's strafing run. The ship bucked and shook under the assault, knocking the two men around in their chairs. The gambler cursed under his breath as he steadied his wounded craft. "We've lost half our shields!" Neo cried out in alarm. Acting as if he didn't hear, an enraged Vaucher brought the Ray into a hard bootlegger's turn that sent a structural groan through the ship. He closed the distance with impossible speed. Neo felt as if a giant invisible hand was pressing against his chest. I didn't know freighters could move this fast. Most can't. This one can. Thanks to Vaucher's expert piloting, the Ray mirrored every last maneuver the headhunter executed. It was as if the two pilots were of one mind. No matter what tactic it tried, the Z-95 could not shake off the larger ship. A sustained burst of heavy blaster fire quickly turned the headhunter into a flaming starburst. Gotcha, Vaucher shouted. And I got you, came Yarku's filtered voice over the comm link. It was followed by another bone-jarring impact as another quad laser blast found its mark. Shields are gone, Neo cried out in alarm, and the hyperdrive's been damaged. The gambler quietly brought the Ray around to face the Night Raider. The big Trock freighter hung there in space, waiting, with its big quad lasers brought to bear. The two idle ships looked like gunfighters, each one waiting for the other to draw. Yarku's voice broke the silence. Your shields are gone. Another hit from my weapons, and you'll be nothing but debris. Do the sensible thing, and hand over the money before it's too late. So we give you the credits, and you'll leave us alone? Vaucher asked. You have my word. He's lying. Vaucher and Neo spoke at the same time. I know. The two men exchanged a quick look, though Neo seemed more than a bit bewildered. The gambler keyed the comlink. Deal. I'll put the credit chip in the probe and launch it over. Minimal contact. Minimal need for trust. Yes, that would be satisfactory. However, any tricks, and I'll blow you to microns. Vaucher shut off the comlink and reached for the controls. We're not really gonna give it to him, are we? Asked a flustered Neo. The gambler grinned. Oh, we're gonna give it to him, all right. 3 of the small forward pods on the ray slid away to reveal darkened launch tubes. All yours, Vaucher said over the comm as he punched the control panel. A trio of proton torpedoes simultaneously screamed out of the ray's tubes, streaking toward the Night Raider. In response, the truck opened up with both quad lasers. Neo shut his eyes. The quad laser bolts reached the ray and impacted against the ship's shields. No! That was the final transmission from the Night Raider before the torpedoes converged and turned the ship into a giant, blossoming fireball. The young man slowly looked around, utterly amazed to be alive. Vaucher flashed a grin. But our shields were gone, Neo said in disbelief. One of the miracles of Moncal engineering, son. Redundant shield systems. Of course, half-witted opponents don't hurt either. The gambler took the controls and engaged the sublight engines. Nar Shaddaa, here we come. I don't have it, the dealer said. How many other ways can I say it? What do you mean you don't have it? Neo repeated for the 4th time. Vaucher arched an eyebrow, leaning on the counter. I think my associate is just curious as to the reason why you no longer have the lightsaber. The chubby businessman grinned, baring diamond white teeth. Because I already sold it. But I put down a deposit so you wouldn't. What can I say? The man said simply. A better offer came along. Neo looked just about ready to kill the fat merchant. Vaucher was suddenly glad the kid was unarmed. Well, who did you sell it to? The young man demanded. Sorry, that's privileged information. Neo swept a hand across the bare warehouse that served as the dealer's shop. It was currently empty except for the 3 of them. There's no one else here. Maybe I can cut a deal with the buyer. I swear I won't say a word. It's not going to be that hard to figure out who gave the information. The dealer shook his head. Can't do it. Now, if there's something else you'd be interested in. Neo seemed to be on the brink of exploding at the man, but thought better of it. He spun around and stormed out of the shop. The gambler shrugged and followed him out. Sorry, kid, Vaucher said as they boarded the ray. He squeezed Neo's shoulder. The galaxy can be a cruel place sometimes. I know, the young man said softly. It's just that I wanted that saber so much. Well, you never know. The gambler's voice abruptly trailed off as he saw the flashing light on the display. What is it? A message. Vaucher tapped the control. A hollow recording crackled into the air, taking the shape of a certain Herglick gambler. Done? The word tumbled from the gambler's lips like a curse. Greetings, farm boy, and to you as well, O legendary one. It seems as though the attempt to recoup my losses failed miserably. Ah well, life can be surprising, can it not? The Herglick held up a long, silver haft and smiled. Neo's eyes had grown to the size of thermal detonators threatening to explode. As I'm sure you've guessed by now, it was I who purchased this elegant little weapon you so craved, and I would not be loath to part with it under certain circumstances. Come on, get to the point, you bloated bag of wind, Vaucher mumbled. What I'm proposing is simple. One last hand of sabacc between myself and Vaucher. If the gambler wins, you can have the lightsaber. If I win, I get the source of the gambler's uncanny luck, the obsidian necklace. If you accept, meet me at the Nigan Cantina 3 hours from now. The holographic image faded. Neo and Vaucher exchanged a look. You've done so much for me already, the young man began. I would never ask you to do this, especially if it means you could lose your necklace. I won't. Lose, that is. The gambler grinned. Besides, I told you, I never could resist a challenge. Dunn and Vaucher faced off once again, this time in a private gambling room at the back of the cantina. The only other beings present were the dealer droid, Neo, and Dunn's droid, V6. One last hand decides it all, correct? Asked the Herglick. The gambler nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off his opponent. The dealer droid sent 5 sabacc cards to each player, then obediently waited for the 2 men to look over the hands they'd been dealt. Sabacc! With a thunderous laugh, the Herglick abruptly shoved his cards into the interference field and glowered in triumph. Beat that! Neo paled as he glanced at Vaucher, who was nervously twirling his pendant. The gambler looked up from his cards and slowly inserted them into the field. First was the idiot card. Then came the 2 of sabers. A 3 of any suit would give Vaucher an idiot's array, and a winning hand. The Herglick took in a sharp breath, his skin mottling furiously. The gambler fingered one of his remaining cards, then slipped it into the field. For a moment, his hand covered the surface, then finally moved clear. The 5 of staves, a total of 8. Vaucher had lost. Neo blinked once, then his mouth fell open. He tried to meet the gambler's eyes, but Vaucher had turned away as if he'd found something incredibly interesting on the floor. The Herglick roared his approval and then extended a flipper. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Vaucher carefully slipped the obsidian pendant from his neck and handed it over without a word. Ecstatic, the Herglick snatched it up. So the unbeatable one has fallen at last. With this, I will be unstoppable. He grinned at Neo. Congratulations, boy. You have just witnessed the death of an old legend and the birth of a new one. Dunn got to his feet and started for the door, V6 trailing behind him. The Herglick paused at the door, and almost as an afterthought, tossed the lightsaber onto the table. The weapon scattered the sabacc cards. Here, it's not as though I need it. With a final terrible chuckle, the Herglick and his droid left. Neo stared first at the saber, then at Vaucher. I don't know what to say. The gambler looked up, brandishing a wide smile. Well, you could start with thank you. He flipped over one of the sabacc cards he hadn't played. The 3 of sabers. The young man was stunned. You had the idiot's array? You won? Then it hit him. But why didn't you play it? First of all, considering how badly Dunn reacted to my winning his money in the first place, do you really think he would have let us just waltz out of here with the lightsaber even if I did win it fair and square? Plus, I counted at least a half dozen mercs nursing glasses of lum on our way in here. My guess is that all they were waiting for was Dunn's order. I see your point, I guess. But you didn't have to sacrifice your pendant. Listen, kid. That particular bauble was given to me a long time ago by a tenacious old girlfriend who wanted more of a relationship than I was ready for at the time. This girl refused to give up, no matter what I did or said. The only reason I considered it lucky was because the day she gave it to me, we finally broke up. I kept the thing and discovered that when I played with it during a game, it did a wonderful job of distracting my opponents. So you see, It really has no mystical power. I make my own luck, as do we all. A smile crept onto Neo's lips. Dun's in for quite a surprise then. Exactly why we should get going, Boucher said, tossing him the lightsaber. Neo caught it easily and couldn't believe he was holding the one thing he had dreamed about for so long. He turned the haft over in his hands, caressing the smooth lines and imagining himself swinging that beautiful bright blade through a graceful arc. Boucher abruptly reached back inside the room and yanked the starstruck young man after him. Neo awoke to a soft humming sound. It varied in pitch almost constantly for a moment, and for a moment he thought some sort of insect had crawled into his head during his nap. He was momentarily disoriented, but slowly recalled being on the Ashanda Ray, headed away from Nar Shaddaa. Far away. Then he saw the odd glow reflected in the ship's bulkhead. Quietly making his way back to the messenger compartment, Neo peeked around the corner. Boucher stood in the Ray's lounging area, deftly swinging the bright orange energy blade through a series of amazing thrusts and parries. After a few moments, the gambler sensed he was being watched and powered down the saber. He turned to Neo, extending the weapon handle first to the young man. I hope you don't mind. I just couldn't resist. How do you know how to do that? Neo demanded. Then the young man suddenly grinned. And can you teach me? The gambler plopped down onto one of the lounge chairs. I guess I still owe you my story, right? The young man nodded, taking the seat opposite Boucher's. Well, the legends surrounding my disappearance were correct. The ray was indeed caught in the Tias cluster, and at the center of that mass of ugly black holes, time was non-existent. Many others had been trapped there before me, though none had survived, except for one, a Jedi Master. She helped me escape, even taught me a little about the Force. That's a pretty short summary. I'll save the whole story for another day, Boucher said dismissively. After all, we'll have plenty of time together when you sign on as my first mate. Do you mean it? I never say what I don't mean, kid. Welcome aboard. So, you'll teach me about the Force? Me? No. I'll teach you how not to lose everything to a Herglick at the sabacc table. She'll instruct you in the mysterious ways of the Force. Neo looked around, not understanding until a shimmering blue figure appeared next to Boucher. Even dressed in simple robes, the woman's beauty was not lost. This is Ariza, Boucher said by way of introduction. The lovely Jedi Master who saved my life. Greetings, Neo. May the Force be with you. And just between the two of us, kid, Boucher said with a wink, you're gonna need it.
Thank you for listening to this unabridged audio presentation from the Star Wars Expanded Universe. The Decade Bird will fly again soon.